Hello all and welcome to another episode of IT Origins. We usually don't have episodes so much as we have articles, but if this is the first time you're experiencing this, I don't know if that's even the right word, this is a series from Gestalt IT where we interview IT luminaries, professionals, executives, engineers, any and all takers really in the world of IT and find out how they got started in this very particular industry. Today we have the fine fortune to talk to Matt Leib. He's a technical sales executive. He's a frequent tech field day delegate. That's kind of how I've gotten to know him. I've always found him to be a really engaging guy to talk to, so I thought he'd be perfect for this. So Matt, welcome to IT Origins.
Thank you, Richard. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's get it started. We'll ask the titular question, as it were. It's not eponymous, but how exactly did you get into IT? What is your IT origin story? How long have you been in the field? And what was your pathway into IT?
It was directly out of college. I had the very focused education where I was an English major. I did have a Spanish and a comp sci minor at the University of Iowa. And, of course, with all that focus, I found myself in need of work upon graduation. So my first job actually straight out of college was managing the computer department at a Radio Shack. I suspect you'll find that there are not just a few of us who've had some time with Tandy Corporation in the past.
I was going to say, yeah, what year would that have been?
I graduated in '86.
Oh, wow. Okay, so prime Radio Shack days.
31 years in the industry.
Did you happen to watch the second season of Stranger Things, Matt?
I did, yes.
I did. Did the Radio Shack hold true in that instance?
It's funny you should say that because, if I go back in time and try to remember, not only did it hold true, but it held true to the time frame. Because Tandy had many different iterations of their store layout for merchandising and product lines, etc. And yeah, I saw in Stranger Things, I saw a TRS-80, I saw a color computer, and I think I even saw a Tandy 1000, which was their first 86 clone, ran at a really screaming 4.77 megahertz.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know they made them that fast.
Yeah, it was not an 8088, mind you. It was an 8086.
Wow. That's like 6 more or something like that.
Or less.
Or less, yeah. Math is very hard. So a lot of tape drives back then, right? Like cassette tape drives?
Yeah. The first PC, actual Intel-based PC I ever had a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk and no hard drive.
Different days, definitely. And then, how did it progress from there? I mean, was the work engaging enough that you wanted to keep with it, or was it, hey, this is what I'm educated in, this is what I'm going to do? I'm curious how it progressed from there.
It was more a practical decision. I liked the industry. I first started doing things like swapping out discs and replacing video cards and things like that. The old CGA video cards. From a mechanical perspective, it was a lot of fun. It was puzzle doing. My father was he drew for a career, but he drew furniture. He had a degree in architectural and industrial design. And I found that the mechanics involved in the world of, constructing PCs and swapping parts, etc., was really appealing to me. And it was a combination at the time of sort of trying to use my mind a little bit, but also trying to communicate to my customers why what they were doing was not accomplishing what they were hoping to accomplish. And and all of that. Yeah, I found it really appealing. And my first enterprise job was with Budget Rent-A-Car, where I was part of this newly developed local area networking team. And on that team, I did, I pretty much did everything from Landtastic to Banyan Vines to Microsoft Land Manager. And my first certification I garnered when I was at Budget, which was downtown Chicago, at NetWare version 311. I'm sorry, 211. Forgive me.
Yeah, wow. It's funny. Banyan Vine seems to come up just about everyone. Every IT pro of a certain age seems to have that deep in their past.
Well, it was a brilliant technology. It was true Ethernet, and their interconnect protocol was TCP/IP, where and that was a big selling point. Where Novell, you used an IPX protocol, which nobody else uses. Although a lot of people who grew up gaming in my time frame did a lot of local area IPX stuff for their MMO games. And forgive me, I know very, very little about these role-playing games and these first-person shooters and things like that. But I know it was a very leveraged protocol.
So with that as your background, so would you say, I mean, kind of getting into that is a little bit more of a networking background, but I know you more as a storage person. Is that a misnomer, Matt?
Well, I mean, nobody really started out in storage back then. I sold my first hard drive that I ever sold was a dual box, dual 5 gig hard drive assembly, and each one of those drives was 5¼ inch wide, but roughly 5 inches high. And it was leveraging old style Winchester technology, and it was kind of pricey. But there were no SANs back then. It was very different technology. But certainly throughout my career, I've added storage and virtualization. I think my first outside of true networking technology arena was probably Citrix, where I became a CNA on WinFrame, which was the precursor to MetaFrame, which still no longer exists. But a lot of the underpinnings of MetaFrame are still in Zen today.
So kind of with that transition, kind of saying, there were no storage guys proper back then. What has been the biggest change in IT since you started your career?
Oh, well, I mean, there are sea changes every, number of years. Obviously, today leveraging what's inside your data center, as well as some cloud asset, is probably the biggest specific change. And I do a lot of cloud architectures and orchestrations, and today hybrid cloud is really, I think, the biggest part of the equation. But the ability to build these storage infrastructures, the ability to build local area networks that span the globe, and then expand out into these cloud architectures, are things that have truly transformed the enterprise, in my opinion.
Is, from your perspective, Matt, you're on the ground. I'm seeing this more from a media perspective, so I would just love your opinion on this. For hybrid cloud, that's been the buzzword of buzzwords just about for the last, 2 years, something like that. Is this, in your opinion, is hybrid cloud is the popularity of it temporary in that we were all promised that the cloud was going to, shoot rainbows and solve all of our problems, and then we realized that it's expensive and that there's all sorts of problem moving workloads to it directly. So hybrid cloud is a way to, ensure you can control costs, you can control data security, all that stuff. Is that temporary as we kind of realize that as we slowly realize that moving to the cloud is much more problematic than we were originally promised, or is this the way IT is going to go for the foreseeable future?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think that I think that anybody that builds an architecture without planning it out, without, like I always say, planning for failure, is doomed to some level of unforeseen, uh, you know, destruction. And I also don't believe necessarily that the cloud is the right location for your application or your data in every case. It's certainly not the least expensive, and anybody that enters into I'm just going to put this stuff up there in AWS without really figuring out what the ramifications might be for doing so, may find themselves pulling that data back in, pulling that application back in. One of the technologies that I try to promote with my customers is that of an evaluation at each application level or on an as-needed basis of where is truly the best location for your application to reside. And there's a tool that I tend to leverage for that I think is very beneficial. What people don't realize is, and we've discussed it before, is if you decide you want to move that massive database back down off of AWS, the data egress charges are outrageous. And architecting that application such that maybe if you do decide at some point in the future to bring that data back in-house, that doing so logically, architecting your application at the outset so that possibility doesn't cost you an arm and a leg over the span of time and time frame, certainly the amount of time that it takes to extract your data from those sites, as well as just shutting down the particular service for that particular slew of application, either hosts or multi-tiered servers or what have you, doesn't come back and haunt you. So start out with an approach that says, if this doesn't work for me, or even better, do your full-on evaluation ahead of time. However, that being said, and more to answer your question, I would say that architecting intelligently can very regularly, very often include some sort of hybrid architecture. I don't think it's going away. I do think that those companies that place all their eggs in the pure non-hybrid cloud environment could be buying some trouble. But hybrid, some combination of a data center with a peerage, either at the public cloud providers or even some of the more hybrid friendly peer cloud environments, it's here to stay.
All right.
Yeah,
that makes total sense. As you were talking about that, I began thinking that the term elastic hybrid cloud came into my mind, and I'm going to need to copyright that before anyone else puts that out there. I'm going to start selling that to companies as a buzzword.
Right. I might steal it, but okay.
All right, Matt, current worst trend in IT. I suspect I may know what one of them is, but what is the, in your mind, absolute worst or worst trends in IT?
Well, I think it's an easy answer, actually. I think the biggest problem in IT today, it all stems from that in-flight magazine decision-making. You read a little bit of architecture, you take a look at a magic quadrant, and you make your decisions based on what somebody says you should be doing without truly analyzing what's most appropriate for your environment, and not seeking out assistance from somebody who might have a broad ecosystem of products under their belt. So it's about marketecture, I think, is the biggest problem. If you leverage the right technology at the right time with an eye towards the future for whatever your particular business need might be, or might have grown to, I would say you're doing your company a big favor. one of the things that I have benefited from is all of the learning, and not to blow some smoke here, but all the learning that I've done at as a Tech Field Day delegate, all the wonderful storage products and orchestration products, and even some of the standard x86 road mapping that I've seen and I've learned from through the last few years, I think has really benefited me in bringing a better voice to my customers at my company. Um, and it gives them the benefit of my experiences. I spent a lot of time on the inside of engineering and IT sort of related fields. I ran the VMware environment, for example, for years at Zurich Insurance. And Zurich, at the time that I took over that environment, was one of the largest VMware environments in the world. In fact, I think we were the first ELA that VMware ever sold. And with that, I had the opportunity to do things in that environment that I would never have been able to do before. Most people struggle because just building a new ESX host and adding it to your cluster, most companies at that time had to buy more VMware licensing. ESX, let's face it, it may be the benchmark for server virtualization, but it's certainly not the least expensive approach. There's a reason it's more expensive, I think, and I tend to be a little biased on this. Having worked there, it's really the most robust stream of products in that space. No disparagement to Citrix or even Microsoft Hyper-V, or for that matter, the Azure Stack platform, which seems to be growing quite heavily. But it really does more on VMware's side. So it's almost like today, when I started in the industry, the buzzword was you can't be fired for buying IBM. Well, today there's a couple of other players in that space, and I don't know that you can necessarily be fired for expanding your VMware infrastructure, or for that matter, buying one of the big players in storage. You can't fault, for example, EMC or NetApp for having rock solid products. You can find that there are alternatives that might be better suited for your particular needs. And again, relying just on what the architecture says is probably, I think, the biggest fault.
Yeah, it's that looking for an easy answer. I mean, that's, part of the reason, back in the day, like you said, you can't get fired for buying IBM because that was the easy answer. And it kind of gets back to your point about hybrid cloud in terms of, having to do that evaluation, not just for, whether you can move your application to the cloud or something like that, but in terms of knowing what's on the market and what it means, not just to be, in the innovators quadrant or, the reliable whatever quadrant that you're in. It's more of how it serves your business and your workloads and that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting.
Exactly. And I sort of tend to lean on that, being an advocate for my customer is my approach. And that's one of the reasons that I no longer work for a vendor, but I work for a reseller in the industry. Working at a vendor, everything's a nail because all you got is your hammer. And I much prefer having those options. And Connection Enterprises has been a real wonderful place to work at. They allow me the flexibility to bring my customers solutions that they might not have considered or they might not have even heard of. And that advocacy, that desire to give my customer their best solution as I see it, has been wonderful. And I really do credit the Tech Field Day videos that I used to watch before I was even a delegate, and those that I have been a part of since I've become a delegate, as giving me some of the basis for the ecosystem, particularly in virtualization and in storage, but so much more as well.
So kind of on the other end here, Matt, what are some of the best trends in IT right now?
Oh, in storage, certainly, we're getting more, better, faster, and better interconnects. I look at technologies like NVMe over Fabric, and I see this as nothing but a great trend. And then again, I wonder if somebody's going to buy one of those incredibly fast, incredibly robust and scalable architectures, is that exactly what their company requires? I think it's a great trend, and I think history has proven that our need for storage is only going to grow. I think some of the other trends that really excite me are technologies like copy data protection and the various players in that arena that have made these disaster recovery environments so much more automatable, if that's a word. Is that a word?
I'll allow it.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Um, uh, I look at the whole category, which really is growing, but not by massive leaps and bounds, but more by the few players that are actually in it making technological leaps and bounds. We're not seeing the big players come out with products that compete with the the cool hot startups like Rubrik and Cohesity. But HPE has a competitive product, and Actifio is still in the game, and this category. I remember the old days when I'd have to order a tape back from Iron Mountain just to recover a file that was last seen 4 months ago, and sort of crapshooting my way through trying to find the right tape for it or the right series of tapes for it. Um, that can't happen in today's world. We're too dynamic. So those kinds of things need to be sort of an online infrastructure that understands that even if it's an archived piece of data, where it is, how quickly it can get it back, and through a sort of a simple no-brainer interface. I think that's really exciting for me. I do see that in virtualization that the players are starting to collaborate so much better. I see VMware working with Microsoft and VMware working with AWS in ways they never had before. I see Citrix opening up their architectures to play with more players in the field, and that for me is very exciting. I'm doing, for example, a burstable VDI project right now for a customer, and that customer needs to be able to have a series of VMs for desktop on-prem and available, but they also want to burst up to roughly 4 times that size. And it's presented its own series of sort of confusions and different approaches depending on whose players you're using. But what I'm seeing is that as an ecosystem, more and more interplay is being fostered through the industry, and it's making my job both more convoluted, but also giving me more options to present to my customer. That's exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's partly a result of a relatively competitive landscape, and it's one of the reasons I'm glad to see. I mean, while AWS dominates in the public cloud space, that there is some pressure from I mean, Microsoft isn't going anywhere, Google's not going anywhere, Oracle's now getting in, trying to play very serious in the public cloud. Results may vary, but yeah, I think a lot of that is that there isn't there are the giants in the space, but they're not completely ascendant over everybody else.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, for example, years ago, we would look at somebody like Cisco or Red Hat as having this sort of wonderful ecosystem where they would partner with anybody. And I'm seeing that expanding more out into these what traditionally have been very proprietary technologies to open themselves up, and APIs are certainly helping that world to things like OpenStack and alternatives. It's actually a very exciting time in the industry.
Do you think some of that pairs though with kind of the everyone has an API that you can plug into, so that makes that part of it easier. But also that a lot of these players that would ordinarily maybe prefer a proprietary solution are now facing, cheaper and cheaper commodity hardware, which is, putting. I mean, you want to talk about NVMe over Fabric, that. I mean, basically killed what Dell was trying to do with DSSD in terms of being able to deliver that kind of performance. I think that's also part of it too, is that you can't just build this giant monolithic proprietary thing, because on a software and a hardware front, they're getting squeezed on both sides.
They absolutely are, and DSSD is a perfect example of a technology that was built to resolve an incredibly high I/O requirement by certain categories in the storage world, but it was built before it became commoditized. Mm-hmm. And believe me, there was nothing wrong with that architecture, but it was proprietary. And yes, you look at startups like Accelero is a perfect example that leverage nothing but commodity architectures and a slightly modified version of the driver to really turn incredible I/O out of stuff you can buy off the rack from Dell or HPE or whomever. And I think that's really exciting. I just think that while DSSD was spectacular in its space for a short-lived period of time, it was also emerging at its, and I think I have to credit Howard Marks, just in case anybody out there doesn't know who I'm talking about, with really illuminating on his podcast exactly why DSSD failed, and no disparaging to the technology, but simply a matter of timing.
Yeah, I completely agree, and all this talk of Accelero, NVMe, I can just somewhere Ray Lucchesi is smiling and getting very excited about it as well. He was the first one I ever heard that was glowing about it, and that kind of made me realize how exciting it is.
Yeah, I was there that day.
Oh yeah,
when we watched Accelero come out of stealth mode, and Ray's jaw was, I've never seen it on the floor like that. It was truly amazing.
Yeah, if you ever want to hear him wax enthusiastic about NVMe, we have a on-premise IT roundtable podcast all about the brave new world of NVMe. That it really contextualizes why he's so excited. A lot of, and Matt, you too are super excited about this development. So shifting gears a little bit, I kind of want to get more into process a little bit. It's very interesting to me when I ask this question. I get a lot of varied responses, which have surprised me. I thought maybe this would be a little more monolithic, but Matt, how do you approach organization at work? What are kind of some of your go-to apps? I just want to like a little window into how you approach work.
It's interesting because in my company, my group, the TSEs, sort of have a little bit more flexibility in how we approach things. For example, I'm a big Mac user, and there's not very many of us in my company. We're very reliant on Active Directory, so I use my Mac more often than I use my Windows machine, which tends to be more dedicated just to email and really proprietary systems that we have in the company. But I love Evernote. I have a client on my watch, a client on my phone, a client on all my machines. So all my note taking is done in Evernote, and a lot of people leverage OneNote instead. I just happen to find the fact that I'm not necessarily bound to the Microsoft ID with my Evernote stuff beneficial to me. So I take a lot of notes using that. I do a lot of my planning from a sort of a project management approach, leveraging tools like Microsoft Project. It is one that I find to be very helpful. But it's interesting you should say that, because I could go back to my old days as an English major and just writing papers, and I found that the organization that I did for writing a paper on some obscure some obscure Shakespeare play like Coriolanus or Troilus and Cressida, exactly the same sort of techniques that I use today when I write a blog post or when I approach a customer query. I rough out my ideas in an outline form, and then I flesh them out. And the writing itself for me, having been an English major, is really much more trivial than the organization that I try to approach my subject with. So once I have a plan in place, some format of an outline, I can then transpose it into a Microsoft project Gantt chart or flow chart, or I like to use precedence diagramming, which is something I learned years ago, a sort of a military approach to precedence diagramming. And then I can present my ideas to my customer. But the main things to do are ask the appropriate questions and get the answers that the customer is looking to achieve. And that can be, where will this fit into your environment in 5 years? So those are very good questions that can guide you when you start to build an architecture. And if you don't have those answers at hand, well, then you're sort of throwing darts at a wall, and that wall could be 500 yards away. You're never going to hit your target. So, information is absolutely crucial. And the more real information I can be armed with, the better my answers are going to be. A lot of it is about communication, though, Rich. If I don't communicate my plan to my customer, my approach to my customer, if they don't effectively answer my questions with real, honest answers, and I'm not adept enough to secure what those answers are, then again, my target, my solution may be completely off base. I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the purpose of a lot of these. These tools can't solve that problem. That's kind of the beautiful human interaction that can be so frustrating at times.
Sure.
Anything particularly used for task management on a more on a more day-to-day level?
I believe it or not, I still use Evernote for that. I have an ongoing list of tasks, and I know it's not particularly glitzy in that space. There's all sorts of good tools, but I find that the more things I have to look at in order to keep myself on track, the harder it is. So I use my Outlook calendar, and Outlook is really dedicated to my customers' needs, to those tasks and timelines I need to accomplish. But I keep my task list in an Evernote list that I use Evernote for everything. I've got lists of books I want to read, lists of blog post ideas I want to do, lists of bands I want to hear or see. It's somewhat methodical.
So I guess it's like a single pane of productivity glass for you, Matt, if I'm going to use the parlance of our times.
Yeah, I don't much care for that expression. I know we all don't.
I do understand, though, what you mean by having everything in one place and not having to shift focus,
exactly.
As it were. That's why for years I used email to do kind of task management, which I know is terrible and everyone says not to do. And I've recently moved away from it. But it is very tempting to just want to live in one interface for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. So speaking of, lists of books you want to read, do you have any book recommendations out there for other IT pros other than the Phoenix Project caveat? Because everyone would say that. And what are you reading right now?
So I'm really, when I read for pleasure, I really don't choose to read nonfiction, although I did enjoy the Phoenix Project. So when I read for pleasure, having been a literature major, I tend towards authors that tell a great story but tell that great story really, really well. And language is very important to me. So I have certain favorite authors. There's a dude named Scott Spencer who he writes actually not about technology at all, but he writes about obsession and sort of the borderline between where your adoration of a particular subject or person tends to cross the boundary into obsession, and the empathy that you feel for the character that goes through this is it's profound. His writing is truly spectacular. Unfortunately, he doesn't write nearly enough to keep me occupied. I tend also to read, I'm on planes a lot, and if I'm not writing something, I'm reading something or sleeping. I actually get better sleep on a plane than I do in my home. So I like a lot of the mystery writers and the I guess it's detective fiction as well. Michael Connelly is great. Stephen Hunter is great. And those books are more like the hamburger as opposed to the steak.
Yeah, a little bit more on the not guilty pleasure side, but yeah, the comfort food of fiction.
I am reading something very interesting right now called Happy Accidents, and its subtitle is Serendipity and Major Medical Breakthroughs in the 20th Century, and I find it very interesting to understand where things like a blood pressure medication was found to grow hair. And so what used to be a blood pressure medication is now something that you can take and help stem your hair loss, or that these kinds of weird serendipitous accidents. It's very cool.
Excellent. If getting back to something you kind of referenced before, you had referenced that your first computer had two 5.25 floppy drives. What was that first computer?
Well, I was working for Tandy at the time. It was the Tandy 1000, and I think it was, I don't even remember what model it was, but I think I had 64K of RAM when I started out, and I beefed it up to 128K. Wow. And a 5.25-inch floppy disk, which was double-sided, double density, so it was 360K on that floppy.
That's all a growing boy needs, right?
Well, if you ask Bill Gates, all we ever needed was 640K.
So you were almost there.
Not quite, yeah.
And Matt, what are you doing when you're not working in IT?
Another good question. One of my favorite avocations is guitar. I play regularly. I don't necessarily play out regularly, but it is sort of a passion for me. I have what's known as GAS, if you've ever heard of that. It stands for Guitar Acquisition Syndrome. I think a lot of us in the industry have certain sort of weird obsessions about collecting things. So I have grown my collection of guitars. But another thing that I like to do, and I don't know, I think I love the instrument as much as I love playing it. And as a result of that and the fact that I no longer really do a whole lot of hands-on engineering, I've started building guitars. So I've built a couple. I built, if this means anything to you, Rich, I've built a Telecaster, which is a standard design from Fender. Of course, mine doesn't say Fender on it because it's not a Fender. It's mine.
It's a
and I haven't created a logo yet. I should probably do that. And the other one I created is a Gibson design called the ES335. These are both really classic instruments. The next project I plan on taking on may be a bit more out of left field than a standard design, but we'll see.
Do you have a white whale or the dream guitar to acquire that you just have like bookmarked in a browser tab or have an eBay search saved for or something like that?
Well, I know that I have a budget. So that becomes a far more difficult conversation. If I were to come into, hundreds of thousands of dollars and it would be, a no brainer type of acquisition, yeah, there's a couple of guitars. One of my all time favorite guitarists, and those people who know me know this already, is Jerry Garcia, or was, I should say. Is for me. He no longer lives. And Jerry played a very specific set of instruments towards the tail end of his life. There are companies out there that manufacture essentially copies of these. They're very, very customized. In fact, they play stereo, which most guitars don't.
Oh yeah, that's wow.
Yeah, he was very enamored of these guitars, and I would really love one of those.
Well, if you're a good boy for Christmas, Matt, we'll see what we can do.
I've been putting it on my Christmas list for decades now, and it just doesn't seem to happen.
And probably the most important question that we have here: how do you caffeine, Matt?
With coffee.
Are you a coffee snob or a connoisseur? I should say. I don't want to preface your response there. Or do you take all comers?
Well, we do have, and there was a funny. We did a tour around Boston when we were on a Tech Field Day event, and on this tour they were touting the wonderful availability of Dunkin' Donuts. Well, we have Dunkin' Donuts here in the Chicago area as well. And if I were to be on a drive and looking for coffee, I would go there first. It is really very consistent, and that's important. However, at home, I have a Keurig, which I know makes me sound like I don't respect the good cup of coffee. It is certainly not the best, but it's very, very convenient. I do balk a bit at the waste that it produces, but it's a consistent sort of decent but not great cup of coffee. I have a French press. I use it on occasion. I've got good beans in my house. I use them on occasion, but there's really no comparing the convenience of my Keurig.
When it comes to Dunkin', I'm always reminded of, because that's kind of my go-to for fast coffee when I'm on the road. And it reminds me of the Napoleon quote that quantity has a quality all of its own.
Well said.
All right, and who would you like to see sit down for the IT Origins interview, Matt? Do you have anyone in mind that you would like to hear?
I really enjoyed the last two that I perused. Enrico's was great, and Rebecca's which I believe just got released today, was excellent. There are some folks out there that are truly, truly interesting. I'd be curious about my old boss. Certainly, if you could get Chad on the board, I don't think he would mind all that much. But the group of delegates that we've got as attendees in some of these conferences are chock full of just some amazing personalities. A few that spring to mind. I think Greg Farrow would be really interesting. He's got a long history and deep. But Rich, it's just a very interesting program, and I really do enjoy hearing how people have come to what they do at this point, right? And not all of them are as old as me, so they didn't start in the IBM XT era in PC DOS version 2. But a lot of them, they had far more rapid growth in their careers and far more interesting paths than I have.
Oh, Matt, you are not excluded from the interesting IT origins that we've talked about. This has been great, and so we'll get you out on this last question: best career advice you've ever received. I know it's an easy one.
It can be summed up in a few short words, and that's look before you leap. Um, I have joined companies in the past that have not been great choices, either because they were not well established or didn't have the right environment, sort of culturally for me. And I have left companies for positions that I never should have. But I think that truly doing your research and finding out all you can about a company before you join them and about the specific role and culture within that environment, career path, et cetera, are absolutely mission critical. I could say also that the best things to happen to me in my career have all stemmed around social media. The writing that I've done, the presence on Twitter, and I tend to leverage Twitter more than any other sort of social network platform, have been great benefits to me in my career. And again, I mentioned him before. Chad Sakich gave me that advice when I started at EMC over 10 years ago, and that was simply start a blog, you'll get used to it. Start tweeting, you'll get used to it. And that was great advice as well. But I think looking before you leap, I mean, for example, on my blog, it's a terrible title. It's called Virtually Tied to My Desktop. It's way too long. People can't remember it, and it's hard to type out. I can certainly say that I should have come up with a better name, but now that I'm branded on that, I kind of stick with it. But had I looked before I leapt, then maybe I would have chosen a better title for it.
Well, Matt, where can we'll get you out on, or not get you out on this. Where can people find more of your writing? Is that what is the actual URL for your blog, and what's your Twitter ID? And let everybody know where they can keep in contact with you.
Sure thing. The blog is virtually tied to my desktop.com, all one word. And I probably write about, I don't know, 2 or 3 posts a month there. And sometimes they're technology related, sometimes they're philosophical, and other times I actually just talk about music. And on Twitter, pretty much the same subject matter, with a smattering of the Chicago Cubs. And that's at MBLEIB on Twitter.
All right, Matt, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time on this, and we'll have this up soon. And we'll also put this in the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast feed as a little bonus episode. And thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.